Crime investigators, what's the creepiest unsolved case you investigated that scares you to this day? My father was a police officer some time ago. While in school, his platoon was called with every other policeman in region. A kid was missing. They were looking for him for quite some time, yet they did not found him. He was supposed to be somewhere in small forest near the town he was living in. Kid just sunk. After some time, people would contact police and say that kid was seen almost 500 kilometers away, alone. They had many suspects but all got the alibi. The case was open for almost 20 years and was closed like 10 years ago. We'll try to find some info about it edit post, but here in Poland we do not put such information to public. Edit. I tried to find anything but there's no trace of this accident. I talked with my dad about that. He said that kid was about 9 or smth. He went missing in Pomerian Voivodeship in Poland. Sadly, that's all he can remember. Sorry guys. I'm not an investigator, but this happened to a little girl in my brother's class and a friend from school. My friend was a happy-go-lucky, chubby guy that everyone liked. He smoked a little weed from time to time, which made it hard for him to keep a job. One day he goes missing and is found in his barn swinging from a rafter by a friend of his. Suicide note. No ladder or any way for him to have gotten up to the rafter. No typical signs of depression or suicide such as saying goodbye to loved ones, taking care of loose ends, etc. gets written off as a suicide, case temporarily closed. 6-year-old girl was missing from her home in the morning, found in the barn hanging from the rafter and raped/molested with a knife. Stepdad had porn of her on his computer and somehow was cleared on the murder by pinning it on a teenage neighbor. Neighbor kid claims stepdad put him up to it and smoked weed with him, but there was no evidence to convict and the teenager went to jail for murder while stepdad got a reduced sentence for child porn. Neither got a drug charge, which was also weird. The reason I mention these together? Stepdad was the friend who called in my friend's death. After no luck with the county, I anonymously messaged Channel 5 and they had to reopen after it was reported publicly that they missed something. Forensic analysts said the suicide note was faked. Suddenly the detective on the case finds there was a ladder present, reclosed the case, and retired. Dude got away with murder, twice in one case and once in another. I'd consider both unsolved till the right guy goes down for them. Not an investigator. In League City TX. There used to be a dead-end road. The city grew like crazy. In the process of clearing land they found dozens of girls buried. Still several unidentified. They stumbled onto the dumping ground for a serial killer. It's called a road if you're familiar with that area. They did a documentary on it at some point. My sister went to prom with a guy who lived next door to this. One night she is over at his house and a random girl comes running, no shows on, screaming, banging on the door saying some guy picked her up or was following her. Boys say the man was nowhere to be found. Prom date and brother get her to safety, then proceed to tell my sister all the weird ghost stories because weird things like that always happen around here. They thought she was spooked by feelings of being watched or something. Until a few years later when they started finding bodies. Again. Edit. Reached out to my sister for full details. This is her story. Okay. So it was some girl from Angelton got in a wreck in front of the house by the field. She comes running to the house, no shoes on. This girl tells them some guy was following her. He was trying to run her off the road. Blocked her car, forcing her down this road, called her. The road was dark, she didn't feel right. She saw the lights on in their house. So she wrecked her car as she jumped out and ran to the back door. Boys got her inside, then saw flashlights around their house. Which apparently happened often, keep her inside long enough to feel like whoever it was left/drove away. Only to realize during all this she had been drugged, that's why she didn't feel right. Call cops. Man was picking up girls at a bar on NASA Road 1 and drugging them. So they caught at least one creep. Bodies were found there from the 70s till I think 2000s. Fun fact, she tells me that apparently now there is a subdivision over these killing fields. Not a crime investigator, but I had a good buddy that went missing in a cornfield when he was a 2-year-old kid, back in 80 or 81. Literally thousands of volunteers came out to help search the fields and land around his farm for 2 days, but he was nowhere to be found. They even brought in a psychic, his parents were so desperate. On the 3rd day he was finally found, quite some distance from where he disappeared. His parents still think to this day that he was abducted, but because of all the media attention and people searching for him, the kidnappers returned him, pretty much just dropping him off and hightailing it out of there. Disclaimer, not involved in law enforcement. In my sleepy little city during the 70s and 80s there was an ongoing series of teenage boys and young men being kidnapped, tortured, repeatedly raped and then horrifically murdered. It was almost an open secret that it was a group of judges, lawyers and some psychos for muscle. The cops seemed almost not to care at all because the victims were all homeless druggies or male prostitutes. Until one day, the gang made the mistake of kidnapping, raping, torturing and killing someone who mattered, the teenage son of a prominent media figure, so the police were forced to do something. Eventually a school janitor was arrested and put away for life. Everyone knows he's a patsy, but the murders stopped and the patsy is probably the best looked after and richest man in the state prison system. There were also a couple of lawyers who were murdered and it is suspected that they were involved but were deemed security risks by the others and taken care of. A guy driving through my town jumped out of his car randomly and has been missing ever since. The story still gives me goosebumps. To my knowledge his remains haven't been found. So him and two buddies are in the car driving from Florida to Greensboro, North Carolina. They stopped off in Benson, North Carolina off 95, and the guy driving just stopped in the street off the highway, got out and started running, allegedly. No explanation why. They allegedly were not even traveling to people they knew in Benson. Really strange and scary for such a small town. Everyone knows everyone and nothing scary or inexplicable like that happens. They searched for him for a long time and nothing ever came up. My best guess is some drug deal gone wrong, maybe they were meeting people out here for something. But why was his body never found? In a town close to me, a few years ago a little boy went missing. He was in a foster home with his siblings. There was apparent previous reports from neighbors of them wandering off frequently because they were left alone without food, breaking into garages I think. He was reported missing by the foster mom. She went on TV and everything I think I remember. There was so many search parties. We live in the desert so Teresa a lot of open land. I stopped hearing things about it. Eventually I asked one of my buddies who works in that PD and he told me they never got any real answers. They found remains years later that they believed to be his in a canal, but it had been so long not much was left. Also they think wild animals had probably spread what was left of the remains around after all these years. Not an investigator, but r/Brian Schaffer. A guy with almost everything going right for him finishes up finals at Ohio State, has the ring picked out, leaves the next day for tropical vacation with his girlfriend and best friends. He has dinner with his dad then goes bar hopping with his friends. At the end of the night, he's caught on surveillance footage walking two girls out and talking with them while two shady-looking dudes eye him. The girls depart, Brian turns and heads back down the hallway that leads to the bar. The guys follow him. The bar closes a few minutes later, but he's nowhere inside when his friends look for him. He's never seen again. It gets weirder and weirder the more you look into it, and it becomes clear the police know way more than they've said, likely because they don't have enough evidence. Sadder still, a few years later, the remnants of Hurricane Ike brought an insane windstorm through Ohio on Labor Day weekend, and while Brian's dad was in the yard cleaning, a branch came off a tree in the storm and killed him. The bar they were in closed either this or last year, and if I remember correctly the building was torn down. I believe we'll never learn. Thank you for mentioning this one. Absolutely not to be a dick, but you've got a lot of the details incorrect. The had everything going for him idea has been disproved. His mother died 3 weeks before his disappearance from a long fight with cancer. He was extremely close to her. He had problems with his girlfriend, telling her at one point to move on from him, then reversing the stance later on. He was also in a ton of debt from school, and was only just getting by academically. This was uncovered by Don Corbett, a private investigator who took on the case to help Randy Schaffer, a friend of his. He did not have a ring picked out. It isn't even clear he was thinking of marrying her. His father mentioned at one point he felt like they would get married eventually, and that has been spun over time into the idea he was going to propose. Not sure where you got the idea he was watched by two shady dudes. If you have a source on that I'd be very happy to read it. The CCTV footage is pretty bad and we only see him moving in the direction of the bar. It's not even known for sure he went back in, though multiple people claim they saw him back in there. The building is still there. It's the South Campus Gateway Complex at OSU. The only changes since 2006 have been renovations that turn the bar into offices. Otherwise it's all the same. And yeah, the police definitely have a lot more info than we do. This is pretty normal in cases with an ongoing investigation. They claim they have 3 main theories they are working on, but who knows how that has progressed. Of course I'd love to know what they know. I really hope someday this case can be put to rest. In high school I knew a girl through mutual friends in our very small town. She was a freshman and I was a senior. The story goes she was walking home around 1 a.m. from a community of trailers about 3 miles from town and before leaving called her mom for a ride. Mom was a drug addict and refused to come get her. She never made it home. 5 to 6 years later I return home from the military and see a newspaper article. Her remains were found wrapped in barbed wire in a canal. The crazy part is that it had to be a local. I know this because where they found her body was a popular swimming spot in the community and was miles from town and on the completely opposite side of town from where she was the night she went missing. No one swims there now and the whole thing is largely forgotten by the community with the exception of those who went to school with her. Obligatory not an investigator comment. In 2018, one of my friends picked me up for work and commented about driving out to a nearby city, Reed, tiny something, to look for a missing boy. A 5-year-old boy with autism named Joe Clyde Daniels had allegedly walked out the back door of the house while his grandmother was asleep in front of the TV, and he disappeared. The case continued to get more disjointed via witness accounts, and Joe's 2 pet pit bulls turned up at a neighbor's house, or were dumped or something? Fuzzy on the details. The dogs were later rehomed by the local shelter. People ran wild with all sorts of theories, that the grandmother had killed him, that the dogs had killed him, that the dogs were taken and dumped to prevent them from protecting Joe Clyde. Hundreds of people were on the ground looking for him, and the search lasted weeks into months. Eventually, Joe Clyde's father fessed up to the murder of his 5-year-old son, and both of Joe Clyde's parents are now in jail. His body has never been recovered, and some people theorize that he's still alive somewhere, or that Joe Sr. was covering up for his wife, his relatives, who knows. Side note, there was a brief panic later into the summer, late spring of the same year after an electric company located remains inside an open cistern. The BI got involved, and although the remains were confirmed not to be that of Joe Clyde, they've never been identified. Not a crime investigator, but the older brother of someone I went to high school with disappeared in August of 2017. He had gotten into drugs, went to rehab, and was trying to rebuild his life when he went to Maryland to visit a friend from rehab. When he got there, the friend had made other plans but sent him to hang out with this other woman in her 40s. He was not allowed at the woman's house so she drove him to a piece of property her uncle owned, left him there to detox without any food, water or shelter and claimed she would be back soon. She left him there for 3 days, claimed to drop off supplies but his parents have their doubts about that. When the parents came a week later, he was gone and the woman claimed to not know where he went. A couple months later his body was found over 100 miles away. His death is being investigated and I believe the state is building a murder case against the woman. I will be following when that happens. Very sad story. If anyone wants to Google it, his name was David Gibson Smith. There was a girl in my high school marine biology class that sat opposite my seat. She was pregnant. We were all so fascinated by her experience, and each day she'd share something new with us that changed, like I felt the baby kick, etc. I once asked her if her boyfriend was excited about the baby and I'll never forget how her face changed. She suddenly got so sad and said something like, "No, he's not really happy about it." She had the baby and then one day she wasn't in class. Then another, and several more. It was a small town so we knew something wasn't right as no one had heard from her. She went to a grocery store in the early evening with her baby. They found her minivan in the parking lot with the van door open and her purse and keys inside. She and the baby were gone and have not been seen since. This really rocked our small town. I had a dream about her probably a year ago. I saw her and she looked just like she did back then. I asked her what happened, where have you been? And I could tell she wanted to say something but it was like she couldn't get her lips to move and I woke up almost shaking. And a good friend told me he'd dreamt of her as well, but a few days before I did. I hope someone is working on her case. It haunts me. Seeing her empty desk in class changed all of us. Medical story, but trust me, it's a good one. So I worked in a major hospital as a CNA in the MICU. We got a guy one night and the story we got was that he was found unconscious in his apartment. The story unfolded throughout the night and the next day and continued to get more and more bizarre. First, he was hypothermic because the AC had been turned on and it was winter so it was well below freezing in the house. Also, he had some kind of major trauma to his testicles, we didn't know what because it had been dressed and he was going straight to the OR. One way or the other, this was reported to the police and they reported that they had suspected something because the dog that was at the scene had blood all over his mouth. At this point we were thinking that maybe the dog attacked him and he passed out and somehow he fell and turned on the AC. The report came back from Detour and they said that the patient's testicles had been cut out intentionally by a dull knife. Now we thought that someone had attacked the guy, cut out his balls, fed them to the dog, and turned on the AC, leaving him for dead. We were thinking maybe he raped someone or something and this was a revenge crime. The next day he was extubated and conscious. The nurse went in to introduce herself and said something like, "We are so sorry that this happened to you." His response? "Why are you sorry? I did it to myself." He had cut out his own balls, fed them to his dog and turned on the AC to kill himself. He was moved to another unit right after this, so we never found out any further details. Easily the most bizarre medical story I have to tell for my years as a CNA. Truly haunting.